She stopped in front of the glass window, not because she had time to waste, but because something inside her refused to let her walk past this time. The street was alive with noise, people moving quickly, cars sliding past, voices mixing into a dull hum, yet for a moment everything around her seemed to fade into the background. All that remained was the reflection in the glass, and the pair of shoes placed carefully on display, glowing softly under warm lights like they belonged to another world entirely. They were simple, not loud, not covered in glitter, but there was something about them that felt calm and powerful at the same time, like quiet confidence shaped into form. Her eyes softened as she looked at them, not with hunger or frustration, but with a kind of peaceful admiration that came from knowing her place in the world and still allowing herself to dream without shame. Her name was Alina, and she had learned early in life that wanting too much could break your heart, so she trained herself to want quietly, to appreciate from a distance, to smile even when her hands were empty. Her shoes were worn, the edges slightly torn, the soles thin from years of walking streets like this one. Streets where people like her existed but were rarely seen. She shifted her weight gently, aware of how out of place she must look standing in front of such a store, yet she didn't move. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if memorizing every detail of the shoes so she could carry that image with her later, back into the small room she called home. "They're beautiful," she whispered under her breath, not expecting anyone to hear, not needing anyone to respond. It was enough for her to say it, enough to acknowledge that something in the world could still make her pause and feel something gentle. What she didn't know was that someone had already noticed her long before she spoke those words. Across the street, leaning slightly against a black car that looked too expensive to belong in such a crowded area, stood a man who had seen many things in his life, but rarely paused for strangers. His name was Adrian Cole, a man whose decisions shaped companies, whose presence carried weight without effort, and whose world operated at a pace far removed from the quiet struggles of people like Alina. He had stepped out of a meeting not far away, his mind still wrapped in numbers and negotiations, when something small and unexpected pulled his attention toward the glass window. It wasn't the shoes, it wasn't the store, it was her. At first, it was nothing more than curiosity. A girl standing still in a moving world. But then he noticed the way she looked at the shoes. Not like someone calculating a purchase. Not like someone angry at what she couldn't have. There was no bitterness in her face, no tightness in her expression. Just softness. Just quiet appreciation. And that was rare. Too rare. Adrian straightened slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to study her more carefully. He had seen people chase things all his life. Money, status, power, attention. He had seen desperation disguised as ambition, greed disguised as need. But this was different. She stood there as if the moment itself was enough. As if simply seeing something beautiful gave her a kind of peace that most people with everything never seemed to find. That thought unsettled him more than he expected. A group of well-dressed women passed behind her, their laughter sharp and loud. One of them glanced briefly in Alina's direction, her lips curling into a smirk that didn't need words to communicate its meaning. It was the kind of look that dismissed someone instantly, reducing them to something smaller without effort. Adrian noticed it, and for a brief second, his jaw tightened. He waited to see how the girl would react. She didn't. Alina remained exactly as she was, her attention still fixed on the shoes, her expression unchanged. If she heard the quiet mockery, she gave it no power. She simply existed in her moment, untouched by the opinions passing behind her. That, more than anything else, held Adrian in place. He pushed himself away from the car without fully realizing why. His steps were slow at first, almost hesitant, as if he were walking towards something he didn't yet understand. He crossed the street, the noise of the city rising around him again, but his focus didn't shift. It stayed locked on the girl who had no idea she was being observed so closely. Alina finally moved after a long moment, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. She took a small breath, one that carried both acceptance and quiet longing, and stepped closer to the store entrance. Her hand hovered near the door handle, pausing just long enough to reveal the conflict inside her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even doubt. It was something simpler. Reality. She knew what was inside. She knew what it cost. And still, she allowed herself one small step forward. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, and Adrian followed a few seconds later, not wanting to draw attention, not wanting to interrupt whatever this moment was becoming. The air inside the store was cool, controlled, untouched by the dust and heat of the street outside. Everything was perfectly arranged, polished, intentional. It was a space designed to remind people of what they could afford and what they couldn't. Alina slowed her steps as she moved deeper inside, her eyes adjusting to the brightness, her posture careful, almost respectful. She didn't touch anything at first. She simply looked. The shoes were even more striking up close, their simplicity now revealing details she couldn't see from outside. The stitching, the curve, the balance. She leaned slightly forward, her breath catching just enough to betray how much she liked them. A sales assistant approached, her smile polite but distant, the kind of smile that stayed on the surface and never reached the eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone measured. Alina turned gently, offering a small nod. "Yes, please, how much are these?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The price was spoken without hesitation, without adjustment, without concern for how it might land. And it landed exactly as expected. A number that existed far outside Alina's reality. For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, not shock, not even disappointment, just acknowledgement. She nodded once as if confirming something she already knew. "They're very beautiful," she said honestly, her lips forming a small smile that carried no bitterness. She reached out carefully, touching the edge of the shoe with the lightest pressure, almost as if she were afraid to disturb it. Then she pulled her hand back, straightened, and gave a small, respectful nod. "Thank you," she added before turning toward the door. Adrian watched everything in silence, something inside him shifting in a way he couldn't immediately explain. It wasn't about the shoes anymore. It wasn't even about her situation. It was about the way she carried herself through it. No entitlement. No performance. Just quiet dignity. As Alina reached the door and stepped back onto the street, Adrian turned to the assistant without hesitation. "I'll take them," he said calmly. The assistant's demeanor changed instantly, her smile widening, her posture straightening. "Of course, sir," she replied quickly. "And the matching bag," he added. "Certainly. Wrap them as a gift." There was a brief pause, just long enough for the instruction to register, before she nodded again. Adrian's gaze shifted back toward the door. Catching a final glimpse of Alina walking away, her pace steady, her shoulders relaxed, as if the moment had already passed for her. But for him it hadn't, not even close. Alina stepped away from the store and back into the rhythm of the street, but something about her pace had changed. It wasn't visible to anyone else. To the outside world, she looked the same. Quiet, simple. Just another girl blending into the crowd. But inside, there was a soft echo of the moment she had just experienced, lingering in her chest like a memory that refused to settle. It wasn't painful. It wasn't heavy. It was something in between, something she had felt many times before but never allowed to grow too large. The quiet awareness of beauty just out of reach. She walked toward the bus stop with steady steps, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her bag, as if grounding herself back into reality. The sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows along the pavement. People passed her without looking, wrapped in their own worlds, their own worries, their own destinations. Alina didn't mind. She had grown used to being unseen. In fact, she had learned how to live comfortably inside that invisibility. It gave her space. It gave her peace. But sometimes, just sometimes, it also reminded her of how small her life had become. She reached the bus stop and sat down on the metal bench, the warmth from the sun still trapped in its surface. The heat pressed lightly against her skin through her clothes, but she didn't move. Instead, she let her shoulders relax for the first time that day. Her shift at the diner would start soon, and she would need to change into her uniform, tie her hair back, and step into another long stretch of hours where she would smile politely, clean endlessly, and keep her thoughts to herself. Her eyes drifted down to her shoes again. The edges were worn more than she had realized. One side had started to peel slightly, and she made a mental note to fix it again when she got home. It wasn't frustration she felt, just acceptance. This was her life, simple, limited, predictable. But then, without warning, her thoughts slipped back to the shoes in the window. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to wear them. Not in a grand setting, not at some fancy event, but just walking. Walking without feeling the ground through thin soles. Walking with a quiet sense of pride. The thought made her lips curve slightly, but she quickly shook her head, as if catching herself doing something dangerous. "Nuff," she whispered softly. Dream small. A shadow fell across her, cutting through the sunlight. Alina looked up, expecting nothing more than someone passing by, but instead, she found herself face to face with the man she had unknowingly crossed paths with moments earlier. He stood tall, composed, holding a bag in his hand that she recognized immediately, even before her mind could fully process it. Her body stiffened slightly. For a second, neither of them spoke. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice calm, controlled, carrying a quiet authority that didn't need to be forced. Alina blinked, her fingers tightening slightly around her bag. "Yes," she replied, unsure. He lifted the bag slightly. "I believe this belongs to you." Confusion spread across her face almost instantly. She shook her head quickly. No. "Doesn't," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't buy anything." "I know," he replied. That answer only deepened her confusion. "Then why are you giving it to me?" she asked. Her brows pulling together as uncertainty crept into her expression. He stepped a little closer, careful not to invade her space too quickly. "Because I saw you," he said simply. Those words landed differently than she expected. Her heart gave a small, uneven beat. "Saw me," she repeated, her voice quieter now. "In the store," he clarified. "You didn't ask for anything. You didn't try to convince anyone. You just appreciated something beautiful and walked away." Alina swallowed, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. It wasn't the kind of attention she was used to. It wasn't mocking or dismissive. It was something else. Something she didn't quite know how to respond to. "I wasn't doing anything special," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Anyone would have done the same." He shook his head gently. "No. Not anyone." She didn't know what to say to that. He extended the bag toward her again. "Please, take it." Her eyes dropped to the bag, then back to his face. Her hands didn't move. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it's too much," she said honestly. "I don't even know you." "That's fair," he replied, nodding once. "My name is Adrian." The name didn't hit her immediately. It wasn't the kind of name she associated with headlines or conversations. It was just a name. But there was something about the way he carried himself that made her realize he wasn't an ordinary man. "I'm Alina," she said quietly, almost out of instinct. "Alina," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. A brief silence settled between them. "I'm not giving this to you because I feel sorry for you," he continued, his voice steady. "And I'm not expecting anything in return." "Then why?" she asked again, this time softer. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Because kindness like yours doesn't show up often," he said. "And when it does, it deserves to be acknowledged." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "That doesn't mean you owe me anything," he added. "Not your time. Not your gratitude. Nothing. But I would like you to have them." Alina's hands trembled slightly as she finally reached out, her fingers brushing against the handles of the bag. The moment she took it, a strange mix of emotions rushed through her. Gratitude, confusion, disbelief, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. She opened the bag slowly, her breath catching as she saw the box inside. Carefully, she lifted the lid. The shoes were there. Perfect, untouched, real. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Say you'll accept them," Adrian replied gently. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "This doesn't happen to people like me," she said. "Maybe it should," he answered. She looked up at him then, really looked this time, as if trying to understand what kind of person would do something like this without hesitation. "Why do I feel like this isn't just about shoes?" she asked quietly. Adrian held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "'Cause it isn't," he said. The bus approached in the distance, its low rumble growing louder. Alina glanced at it, then back at him, torn between two worlds in that single moment. "I have to go," she said softly. He nodded. "Of course," she hesitated, then spoke again. "Thank you, Adrian." He gave a small nod in return. As she stepped onto the bus, holding the bag close to her chest, she felt something shift inside her. Not just because of what she had received, but because of how it was given. Without judgment, without expectation. And as the bus pulled away, she looked out the window, catching one last glimpse of him standing there, still watching, still calm, as if he knew something she didn't. Back on the street, Adrian remained where he was, his hands now empty, but his mind far from it. He had made countless decisions in his life, deals that changed industries, moves that shaped futures. But none of them had felt quite like this, and he couldn't explain why. The bus moved slowly through the evening traffic, stopping every few blocks, letting people in and out, but Alina barely noticed any of it. She sat by the window, her body still, her mind anything but. The bag rested carefully on her lap, her fingers wrapped tightly around the handles as if she feared it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Every now and then, she glanced inside again, just to make sure it was real. The shoes were still there, perfect, untouched, waiting. Her reflection in the window looked different to her now. Not because anything had physically changed, but because something inside her had shifted in a way she didn't yet understand. For so long her world had been defined by limits. What she could afford, what she could reach, what she had to accept. She had built her life around those boundaries, shaping her expectations carefully, so she would never feel the sting of disappointment too deeply. But this didn't fit inside those limits. A stranger had seen her, not just looked at her, but truly seen her. And instead of ignoring her, or judging her, or dismissing her like so many others had done before, he had responded with kindness. Real kindness. The kind that didn't come with conditions. Her chest tightened slightly as she leaned her head back against the window. "Why?" she whispered under her breath. The question wasn't meant for anyone. It was just something she needed to ask out loud, even if there was no answer. When the bus finally reached her stop, she stood carefully, making sure the bag stayed close to her side. She stepped off onto the quiet street that led to her apartment building. The noise of the city softened here. The buildings were older, the sidewalks slightly cracked, the lights dimmer. It was a place people passed through, not a place they admired, but it was hers. She walked up the narrow staircase to her small apartment, unlocking the door with a soft click. The room inside was simple. A small bed, a table, a chair, and a kitchenette that had seen better days. Everything was clean, organized, but clearly worn with time. For a moment she just stood there, the bag still in her hand, unsure what to do next. Then slowly, she walked to the table and placed it down gently, as if setting something fragile into place. She opened it again. The same feeling returned instantly. Her fingers moved carefully as she lifted one of the shoes out of the box, holding it in both hands. The leather was smooth beneath her touch, the shape elegant without effort. She turned it slightly, studying it as if it might reveal something more if she looked closely enough. "This doesn't belong in my life," she murmured. But even as she said it, something inside her resisted the idea. Maybe it did. Maybe just this once, something beautiful was allowed to exist in her world without needing to be explained or justified. She sat down slowly, slipping off her old shoes and placing them neatly beside the chair. Then, with a deep breath, she tried on the heels. They fit perfectly, not tight, not loose, as if they had been made for her. Alina stood up carefully, her balance adjusting to the slight lift. She took one step, then another, her movements cautious at first, then a little more confident. The difference was immediate. It wasn't just the height. It wasn't just the comfort. It was the feeling. She walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall and looked at herself. For a moment, she didn't recognize the girl staring back at her. Her posture was straighter, her expression softer, yet stronger at the same time. It wasn't about looking rich or impressive. It was something quieter. She looked sure. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away this time. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe I'm allowed to have more than this." The words felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous, but they also felt right. The next morning came earlier than expected. Alina woke up before her alarm, her eyes opening slowly as the memory of the previous day returned almost instantly. For a second, she thought it might have been a dream, something too perfect to be real. But then she saw the box on the table, and she knew it wasn't. She sat up, pulling the blanket aside, her gaze lingering on the shoes for a long moment. Then she shook her head lightly, forcing herself to focus. Work, she reminded herself. Her routine didn't change. She still prepared the same simple breakfast, still wore the same uniform, still tied her hair back the same way. Life hadn't magically transformed overnight, but something inside her had. When she reached the diner, the familiar smell of coffee and fried food greeted her, grounding her back into reality. The morning rush had already begun, customers filling tables, conversations overlapping, orders being called out. "Alina! You're late!" Her manager's voice cut through the noise. "Sorry," she replied quickly, moving into position without hesitation. The hours passed like they always did. Cleaning tables, carrying trays, wiping counters. But there was a difference in how she moved. A subtle change that even she couldn't fully explain. She wasn't just enduring the day anymore. She was moving through it. At one point, as she bent down to pick up a fallen napkin, one of the customers glanced at her shoes. "They're nice," the woman said casually. Alina froze for a split second. "Oh, thank you," she replied, her voice soft. It was a small moment, insignificant to anyone else. But to her, it meant something. Because for once, someone noticed her without judgment. Later that afternoon, during her short break, her phone buzzed. She frowned slightly, pulling it out of her pocket. Unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it. Then she opened the message. "Hello, Alina. I hope you're having a good day." Adrian, her heart skipped. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, her mind racing. Why was he texting her? What did he want? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. Then slowly, she typed, "Hello. Yes, my day is okay. Thank you for yesterday. I still don't know what to say." The reply came faster than she expected. "You don't have to say anything. But I'd like to ask you something, if that's okay." Her chest tightened slightly. "What is it?" she typed back. There was a pause this time, long enough to make her wonder if she had said something wrong. Then the message appeared. "Would you allow me to take you for coffee? Just coffee. No expectations." Alina stared at the words. Her first instinct was to say no. Not because she didn't want to go, but because she didn't understand why he would ask. Men like him didn't invite women like her for coffee. That wasn't how the world worked. And yet nothing about yesterday had followed the rules she knew. She exhaled slowly, her thoughts tangled between caution and curiosity. Finally, she typed, "Okay. Coffee is fine." As soon as she sent it, her heart started beating faster. Something was changing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she also wasn't ready to walk away from it. The rest of her shift passed in a strange blur, as if time had decided to move both too fast and too slow at the same time. Alina found herself replaying the message in her head over and over again, not because it was complicated, but because it felt unfamiliar. Coffee. Such a simple word. Such a normal invitation, yet in her world, it carried a weight she wasn't used to handling. People didn't ask her out like that. Not like this. Not with calm respect, without pressure, without hidden intentions she could easily recognize. She caught herself making small mistakes she normally wouldn't make. Placing a glass slightly off-center. Forgetting to wipe a corner of a table. Nothing serious, nothing that would get her in trouble. But enough to remind her that her mind wasn't fully present. It kept drifting back to him. To Adrian. To the way he spoke. To the way he looked at her, as if she mattered in a way she had never experienced before. When her shift finally ended, she changed quickly, her movements more careful than usual. She didn't know where they would meet yet, but she felt an unusual urge to look better. Not different, not like someone she wasn't, but simply more put together. She paused in front of the small mirror in the staff room, adjusting a loose strand of hair, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Why does this feel so important? She whispered to herself. She didn't have an answer. By the time she stepped outside, the sky had softened into early evening, the sunlight fading into a warm glow that stretched across the buildings. Her phone buzzed again. "I'll send you the location," the message read. A few seconds later, another message appeared with the address. Alina looked at it, her brows lifting slightly. It wasn't a place she had ever been before. In fact, it wasn't even an area she usually visited. It was quieter, more refined, known for its small, elegant cafes and calm atmosphere. Places where people didn't rush. Places where people belonged. She swallowed lightly. "Okay," she replied. The journey there felt longer than it actually was. Every step, every bus stop, every passing street seemed to stretch the anticipation further. By the time she arrived, her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. The cafe was exactly as she imagined. Soft lighting, gentle music playing in the background, a few people sitting quietly at their tables, engaged in calm conversations or simply enjoying their drinks in silence. It was peaceful, controlled, different from the loud, chaotic environment she was used to. She hesitated at the entrance for a moment before stepping inside. Her eyes scanned the room, and then she saw him. Adrian was already there, seated at a corner table, his posture relaxed but attentive. He looked up almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. When their eyes met, a small, genuine smile appeared on his face. Alina felt something shift again. She walked toward him slowly, her steps careful but steady. "Hi?" she said softly as she reached the table. "Hi," he replied, standing up briefly as a sign of respect before sitting back down. For a second, neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was just new. "I'm glad you came," Adrian said finally. "I almost didn't," she admitted honestly. He nodded as if he expected that answer. "That's fair." A waiter approached, taking their orders quickly before leaving them alone again. Alina wrapped her hands around the cup once it arrived, the warmth grounding her slightly. "I don't really understand this," she said after a moment, her voice quiet but direct. "Understand what?" he asked. "Why you're here. Why you asked me to come." Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze steady but not overwhelming. "Because I wanted to talk to you," he said simply. "That's not something men like you usually do," she replied. "And what kind of men are those?" he asked calmly. She hesitated. "Men who live in a different world," she said carefully. He studied her for a moment before responding. "You think I'm that different?" he asked. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Why?" "Because you are," she said. "You don't have to worry about things I worry about. You don't have to think about money the same way. You don't have to choose between needs and wants." Her voice didn't carry bitterness. Just truth. Adrian nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I don't." The honesty caught her off guard. "But doesn't mean I don't understand other things," he added. "Like what?" she asked. "Like what it feels like to be surrounded by people and still feel alone," he said. Alina blinked. She hadn't expected that. "You?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "It does when you realize that not everyone around you is there for you," he explained. "Sometimes they're there for what you have, not who you are." She looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening slightly around it. "I think I understand that," she said quietly. He leaned forward just a little. "Do you?" he asked. She nodded. "Not in the same way," she admitted. "But I've had people look at me and decide who I am without asking. Decide what I'm worth based on how I look, what I wear, what I can afford." Their eyes met again. "For different reasons," she continued. "But it still feels like being misunderstood." Adrian's expression softened. "Exactly," he said. A brief silence followed, but this time it felt deeper, more connected. "I'm not trying to change your life," Adrian said after a moment. "And I'm not trying to be someone who solves your problems." Alina listened carefully. "I just want to know you," he finished. Her heart responded to those words in a way she couldn't fully explain. Why me? She asked again, almost instinctively. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face, as if searching for the right way to explain something that wasn't simple. Because you're real, he said finally. And that's rare. Her breath caught slightly. I don't even know what that means, she admitted. It means you don't pretend, he said. You don't perform for approval. You don't try to be something you're not. Alina looked away for a moment, processing his words. I don't have the luxury to pretend, she said quietly. Maybe, he replied. But some people still try. She let out a small breath, almost like a quiet laugh. That sounds exhausting, she said. It is, he agreed. The conversation shifted slowly after that. It became lighter, more natural. They talked about small things at first, her job at the diner, his work, though he kept it simple, not overwhelming her with details, her childhood, his past. Time moved differently there. Hours passed without either of them noticing. At one point, Alina realized she hadn't felt this comfortable talking to someone in a very long time, not because he was impressive, but because he was present. When they finally stood up to leave, the night had already settled outside, the city lights glowing softly around them. At the door, Adrian paused. Can I ask you something? He said. Alina nodded. Would you be open to seeing me again? He asked. The question was simple, but the meaning behind it wasn't. She felt that familiar hesitation rise again. Fear, doubt, uncertainty. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Curiosity. Hope. Yes, she said softly. His expression didn't change dramatically, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Good, he replied. As they stepped outside together, the cool air brushing against them, Alina realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think before. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was becoming something more. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure where it would lead. But she didn't want to walk away from it. The days that followed didn't rush forward the way stories usually do. They unfolded slowly, almost quietly, like something careful was taking shape between them, something neither of them wanted to force or break. Alina returned to her routine, waking early, working long hours, managing her life the way she always had. But now, there was a difference she couldn't ignore. There was someone who existed just outside that routine, someone who had stepped into her world without trying to control it. Adrian didn't overwhelm her with constant messages or sudden plans. Instead, he reached out in simple ways. A message in the morning asking how her day looked. A short check in during her break. Nothing excessive. Nothing that felt like pressure. And that, more than anything, made her trust the situation a little more. Trust didn't come easily to Alina. Life had taught her to be careful with people, to measure their intentions, to notice the small signs others often ignored. She had seen kindness that came with expectations. Help that came with hidden costs. Smiles that disappeared the moment something was no longer beneficial. So she watched Adrian closely, not in suspicion, but in quiet observation. And the more she watched, the more she noticed what he didn't do. He didn't rush her. He didn't try to impress her with his wealth. He didn't speak down to her or treat her like someone who needed to be saved. He simply showed up. One evening, about a week after their first coffee, they met again. This time it was a small park tucked between buildings, a place most people overlooked. The benches were simple, the trees offering soft shade as the sun dipped lower in the sky. It wasn't the kind of place Adrian usually spent time in, but he chose it anyway. Alina noticed that. You could take me somewhere nicer, she said lightly as they walked along the path. I could, he replied. But I'm more interested in where you're comfortable. She glanced at him, a small smile forming. This is comfortable, she admitted. They sat down on a bench, the quiet around them creating a space where conversation didn't feel forced. For a while, they didn't speak. And strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. Alina leaned back slightly, looking up at the sky through the branches above. I used to come to places like this a lot when I was younger, she said after a moment. Why did you stop? Adrian asked. She shrugged lightly. Life got busy, she said. Responsibilities, work. You don't really think about sitting in parks when you're trying to survive. He nodded, understanding more than she expected. "And now?" he asked. She took a small breath. "Now it feels like I forgot something important," she said quietly. "What?" he asked. "How to pause," she replied. Adrian looked at her for a moment, then leaned back as well, mirroring her position. "Maybe you're remembering," he said. She smiled slightly, her eyes still on the sky. "Maybe," she agreed. Another silence followed, but this one felt deeper, more settled. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Of course." "Why aren't you like the others?" she asked. He turned his head slightly, studying her expression. "What others?" "The people who have what you have," she clarified. "The ones who act like everything revolves around them." He let out a small breath, almost like a quiet laugh. "I used to be," he admitted. That caught her attention. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "When you grow up in a world where everything is handed to you, you start to believe that's how things should be." "So what changed?" she asked. He paused, his gaze shifting forward. "Time," he said. "Experience. Loss." Alina didn't push further. She didn't need to. The weight behind that single word was enough. "I realized something," he continued. "Money can give you comfort. It can give you options. But it doesn't give you meaning." She turned her head slightly, looking at him now. "And what gives meaning?" she asked. "People," he answered. "Real connections. Moments that aren't built on transactions." Her chest tightened slightly at that. "And you think this is one of those?" she asked carefully. He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. The certainty in his voice made her look away again, her thoughts shifting. "I'm scared of that," she admitted. "Why?" he asked gently. "Because things like that don't usually last," she said. "Not for people like me." Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "And what kind of people are those?" he asked. She hesitated. "People who don't have much," she said. "Things come and go. You learn not to get too attached." He studied her for a moment before responding. "And has that made your life easier?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. "No," she said finally. "Then maybe it's not the best way to live," he said. She let out a quiet breath, her fingers intertwining in her lap. "Maybe," she admitted. The sun dipped lower, the light around them softening into evening tones. "Alina," Adrian said after a moment. She looked at him. "I meant what I said before," he continued. "I'm not here to change your life overnight, and I'm not here to make promises I can't keep." She listened carefully. "But I do want to be part of it," he added. Her heart responded again, that same unfamiliar feeling rising. "And what if I don't know how to let someone be part of it?" she asked. "Then we figure it out," he said simply. She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. There was no pressure in his eyes, no expectation, just patience. And that, more than anything else, made her feel safe. The weeks continued to pass, and slowly, their connection deepened in ways neither of them had planned but both of them felt. Alina started noticing changes in herself. Small ones at first. She spoke a little more confidently. She smiled a little more easily. She allowed herself to think about the future in ways she hadn't before. And Adrian noticed it too. But he didn't comment on it. He didn't need to. One evening, after another quiet meeting, Adrian sent her a message. "My company is opening a new position. It's entry level, but it comes with training. I thought of you." Alina stared at the message for a long time. Her first reaction wasn't excitement. It was fear. "What if I'm not good enough?" she replied. The response came quickly. "You are. But you don't have to decide right away." She looked around her small apartment, her eyes landing on the shoes sitting neatly by the table. The same shoes that had started all of this. The same moment that had shifted something inside her. She took a slow breath. "I want to try," she typed back. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and for the first time in a long time, Alina felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Not just hope, but possibility. The week before the interview felt longer than any week Alina could remember. Every morning she woke up with the same thought, pressing gently against her chest. What if this was the door she had been waiting for? And what if she failed the moment she stepped through it? She tried not to show it at work, but her hands moved slower than usual, her mind wandering between orders tables and the image of that tall company building she had only passed from a distance. It was not just a job to her. It felt like a test of whether she was allowed to become someone bigger than the life she had always known. At night, she sat at her small table with a notebook open in front of her, practicing answers to questions she imagined they might ask. She wrote slowly, carefully, crossing out lines when they sounded too weak or too desperate. She wanted to be honest, but she didn't want to look helpless. She wanted to show confidence, but she didn't want to pretend to be someone polished and perfect. That balance scared her most of all. In the diner, she knew who she was. She knew where everything belonged, how customers behaved, what her manager expected, what mistakes to avoid. But inside Adrian's company, she would be entering a world where people spoke differently, dressed differently, and judged silently before saying a word. Adrian noticed the fear in her messages, even when she tried to hide it. He didn't drown her in empty encouragement. He didn't tell her it would be easy. Instead, he sent simple reminders that felt stronger than grand speeches. You don't need to become someone else to deserve this. Alina read that message several times. On the morning of the interview, she woke before sunrise. Her room was still dark, quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Then she stood and began preparing. She wore her best dress, a simple navy one she had bought second-hand months ago for church and special occasions. She brushed her hair until it fell smoothly over her shoulders, then tied part of it back so her face looked neat. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost laughed from nervousness. She looked like herself, but also like someone trying to step into a future she had not yet earned. Then her eyes moved to the cream heels. They were waiting by the table, clean and quiet, the same way they had waited since the first night she brought them home. She had worn them only a few times, always carefully, always with the feeling that they belonged to a more confident version of her. This morning, she hesitated before touching them. "What if I look foolish?" she whispered. The room gave no answer. She sat down and slipped them on. The fit was still perfect. When she stood, her posture changed without effort. Her shoulders lifted, her spine straightened, not because the shoes had magic in them, but because they reminded her of the promise she had made to herself after receiving them. She had promised not to stop believing that good things could reach her life. She picked up her bag, locked her apartment door, and stepped into the morning. The city felt different that day. The same buses, the same streets, the same faces moving past her, but Alina felt every step as if it carried more meaning than usual. By the time she arrived in front of the company building, her heartbeat was so loud she could almost hear it. The building rose high above her, glass and steel reflecting the morning sky. People walked in and out wearing suits, carrying laptops, moving with the confidence of those who belonged there. Alina stopped at the entrance. For 1 second, she nearly turned away. Then the security guard opened the door and gave her a polite nod. "Good morning, miss." The simple respect in his voice pushed her forward. "Good morning," she replied softly. Inside, the lobby was wide and bright, with polished floors that reflected the lights above. A large desk stood near the center, and behind it sat a receptionist who looked up with a professional smile. "I'm here for an interview," Alina said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is Alina Moore." The receptionist checked the list and nodded. "Yes, Miss Moore. Please have a seat. Someone will come for you shortly, Miss Moore." Alina sat down carefully, repeating the words in her mind. She wasn't used to hearing her name spoken like that. With respect, with formality, with no hint of pity. A few minutes later, a woman in a grey blazer approached her. She was older, composed, with kind eyes that still looked sharp enough to miss nothing. "Alina?" she asked. "Yes," Alina said, standing quickly. "I'm Mrs. Bennett. I'll be speaking with you today." Alina followed her into a smaller room with a round table, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the street below. She sat down, placing her hands carefully in her lap so Mrs. Bennett would not notice they were trembling. The interview began with simple questions. her work history, her responsibilities at the diner, her education, her availability. Alina answered honestly. She did not exaggerate. She did not pretend she had office experience she didn't have. When she didn't know something, she said so plainly, but added that she was willing to learn. Mrs. Bennet watched her closely. "What makes you interested in this position?" she asked. Alina paused. She had practiced answers to this question, but suddenly all of them felt too polished, too borrowed. So she took a breath and chose the truth. "Because I want to build a better life," she said. "And I know wanting it is not enough. I'm ready to work for it. I've worked hard all my life, but I want to grow now. I want to learn skills that can take me somewhere." Mrs. Bennet's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained professional. "And why should we choose you?" Alina's throat tightened. This was the question she feared most. For a second, she looked down at her hands. Then she looked back up. "Because I will not waste the chance," she said quietly. "I may not know everything yet, but I listen. I learn quickly. I treat people with respect. And if you give me a place here, I will show up every day with gratitude and effort." The room became quiet. Mrs. Bennet leaned back slightly, studying her. "That is a good answer," she said. Alina felt warmth rise in her face. The interview lasted 20 more minutes. By the end, Alina felt drained, but she also felt strangely proud. She had not become someone else. She had not hidden her past. She had simply shown up. When she left the building, she found Adrian standing near the front steps. He wasn't close enough to interfere. He wasn't waiting like someone expecting praise. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, watching with calm attention. Alina walked toward him slowly. "How did it go?" he asked. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I didn't run away," she said. Adrian smiled. "Then it already went well." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You make everything sound simple." "No," he said. "I just know courage when I see it." She looked away, but the words stayed with her. 2 days later, the call came. Alina was wiping a table at the diner when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. Unknown office number. Her breath caught. She stepped into the back hallway and answered. "Hello. May I speak with Alina Moore?" "This is Alina. This is Mrs. Bennet from Cole International. I'm pleased to tell you we would like to offer you the position." For a moment, the world went completely silent. Alina pressed one hand against the wall. "Miss Moore?" Mrs. Bennet asked gently. "Yes," Alina whispered. "I'm here, I'm sorry." "Thank you. Thank you so much." After the call ended, she stood in the hallway with the phone still against her chest. Then, slowly, tears filled her eyes. She had gotten the job. Not because someone handed her a life wrapped in luxury. Not because she was rescued like a helpless girl from a sad story. She had walked into that building herself. She had answered the questions herself. She had believed just enough to try. Her first thought was to call Adrian. He answered quickly. "I got it," she said, her voice breaking. There was a pause, then his voice came warm and steady. "I knew you would." "No," she said, laughing through tears. "You hoped I would." "I knew you could," he corrected softly. That made her cry harder. Her final days at the diner were emotional in ways she didn't expect. Some co-workers hugged her, genuinely happy. Others looked at her differently, with surprise, maybe even jealousy. Her manager acted as if losing her was an inconvenience more than a goodbye, but Alina didn't let that hurt her. For years, she had given that place her energy, her patience, her tired feet, and her quiet loyalty. Now she was leaving with peace. On her last evening, after cleaning her final table, she stood by the diner door and looked back. The chairs were stacked. The lights were dim. The smell of coffee and fried oil lingered in the air. She felt grateful. But she also felt free. Her first month at Cole International was difficult. The building that had seemed beautiful from outside became intimidating from within. There were systems she didn't understand, software she had never used, phrases people said as if everyone should know them. She made mistakes. Small ones, but enough to make her cheeks burn. Once, she transferred a call to the wrong department. Another time, she misread a schedule and nearly caused confusion before catching it. But each time she learned. Mrs. Bennet was firm but fair. Mistakes are not the problem, she told Alina one afternoon. Repeating them without learning is the problem. Alina wrote that down. She worked harder than anyone expected. She arrived early. She stayed late when allowed. She asked questions even when embarrassment pressed against her throat. Slowly, the fear began to shrink. Slowly, people began greeting her by name. And slowly, Alina began to belong. But not everyone was pleased. There was one woman in the office named Vanessa Hale, a senior assistant with perfect hair, sharp clothes and a sharper smile. From the beginning, Vanessa watched Alina with thinly hidden contempt. She noticed the shoes. She noticed Adrian speaking kindly to her in passing. She noticed the way Mrs. Bennet praised her effort. And Vanessa hated it. One afternoon, as Alina organized files near the front desk, Vanessa walked over and placed a stack of folders down harder than necessary. "Must be nice," Vanessa said. Alina looked up. "Sorry." Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were cold. Getting opportunities because someone rich feels sorry for you. The words struck with more force than Alina expected. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Vanessa leaned closer. "Just be careful. Men like Adrian Cole don't pick up girls from the street unless they want something." Alina's fingers tightened around the folder in her hand. Old fears stirred inside her. Was that what people thought? Was that what this looked like? Was every step she took now going to be questioned, because Adrian had been the first person to notice her? She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say she had earned her place. But her voice didn't come quickly enough. Vanessa straightened, satisfied by the silence. "Anyway," she said lightly. "Welcome to the real world." Then she walked away. Alina stood there, heart pounding, the folder still clutched in her hand. For the first time since entering this new life, doubt found a crack and slipped in. That evening, Adrian noticed immediately. They met outside the building after work, and before he could even ask how her day had been, he saw the shadow in her face. "What happened?" he asked. Alina forced a small smile. "Nothing." He didn't accept it. "Alina," she looked down. The gentleness in his voice made it harder to hide. "Someone said something." She admitted. His expression changed. "Ooh, it doesn't matter. It matters if it hurt you." She took a slow breath. "Vanessa said people think I'm here because you felt sorry for me." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "And do you believe that?" he asked. Alina looked up at him, eyes shining with uncertainty. "I don't want to," she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Then don't give someone else the power to define your truth." She swallowed. "You got that job because you earned it," he said. "I opened a door, yes. But you walked through it. You interviewed. You learned, you stayed. That is yours." Alina's eyes filled. "I just don't want people to think I'm some poor girl you saved." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You were never a poor girl to me," he said. "You were a woman I respected before I even knew your name." The words settled over her slowly, reaching the part of her that Vanessa had bruised. But Adrian wasn't finished. "And if anyone in my company makes you feel small again," he added, "they will answer for their behavior. Not because of you and me. Because disrespect has no place there." For the first time that day, Alina breathed properly. Still, as she walked home later, she understood something clearly. A new life did not mean the end of pain. Sometimes, stepping higher only made people more eager to pull you down. Vanessa's words did not disappear overnight. They stayed with Alina like a stain she kept trying to wash from her thoughts. Still, she refused to let them control her steps. The next morning, she arrived early, placed her bag beneath the desk, opened the schedule, and began her work with quiet focus. Vanessa passed by twice, waiting for weakness. But Alina gave her none. Days turned into weeks. Alina improved faster than anyone expected. She learned names, systems, meetings, calls, and small office rules nobody had explained. Mrs. Bennet trusted her more. Clients began asking for her because she was patient, clear, and kind. Then one Friday, everything changed. A major investor arrived unexpectedly, angry about a contract error. The office panicked. Vanessa froze because the file was missing from her records. Mrs. Bennet was in a meeting. Adrian was upstairs with board members. Alina listened carefully, then remembered a document she had scanned 2 days earlier. She searched the system, found the correct file, printed it, and calmly handed it to the investor. "This should answer your concern, sir," she said. The man read it, his anger fading. "Who prepared this?" Alina swallowed. "I only organized it." "No," he said. "You saved this meeting." By evening the whole office knew. Vanessa said nothing. Adrian found Alina near the lobby after everyone left. "I heard what happened." She looked down, smiling softly. "I just did my job." "No," he said. "You proved something." She met his eyes. "You proved you belong here," he said. This time she believed him. Months passed, and Alina's life kept changing, not like magic, but like sunrise. Slowly, surely. She moved into a better apartment. She started evening classes. She helped a young cleaner in the building study for interviews. She became the kind of person she once needed. And Adrian stayed beside her, never rushing, never owning her, never making her feel small. One evening he took her back to the same street where it all began. The luxury store window glowed under soft lights. The same kind of shoes sat inside, beautiful and distant. Alina smiled. "I remember standing here thinking I could only dream." Adrian looked at her gently. "And now," she took his hand. "Now I know dreams are not only for people born lucky." He reached into his pocket and opened a small box. Inside was a simple ring. "I saw your heart before I knew your name," he said. "And every day since, you've shown me that beauty without pride, strength without cruelty, and love without greed still exist. Alina, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Adrian." And as he placed the ring on her finger, Alina looked once more at the glass window. She no longer saw a poor girl outside it. She saw a woman who had walked through pain with dignity, and finally reached the life she was brave enough to believe